Next up, we have our superintendent's report. Superintendent Dixon, are you ready to take the helm here?
I am ready. Good morning, everybody. Jeff Van Holten is going to drive for me rather than look at me for the next 15 minutes. We'll use some slides for talking points. So if you could pull those up, Jeff. Let me know when I can't see them on the screen.
Well, he has the first page.
They are up.
All right, I am not seeing them for some reason. So let's see. I don't know why I can't see them. That's very odd. All right. Now I've got them. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start off. You can go to the next slide, Jeff. Thanks. I want to start off by just thanking our many employees. Every year at this time, we get to celebrate those who have had service milestones, and we do that in 5-year increments. So yesterday, we met online. Sherry Reben did a great job of putting a slideshow together for us with certificates and their pictures. We had everyone online, and we clapped for each other and cheered and read a little synopsis about each one of them. And I wish you could have all been on to hear those. But publicly, I want to just read the list to you if you'll indulge me. So for 5-year recognitions, we have Kathleen Britton, Casey Child, Jolie Honey, Doug Livingston, Sue Mack, Sean McHenry, Brian Olmstead, Kim Ratke, Pamela Talili, Jennifer Thronson, Jared Wright, Gary Bronson, Camille Clark, Adam Little, David McKay, Jody McGill, Anne Michelle Neal, Sean Perkins, Camille Sheik, Albert Tay, and Becky Unker. For our 10-year recognitions, we have Angela Battaglia, Paula Huber, Jennifer Lambert, Tyler Mills, Bert Sears, Jennifer Yates, Teresa Davenport, Corey Camp, Michelle Millar, Wendy Morton, and Nils Stevens. For our 15-year recognitions, we have Patrick Lee and Susan McRae. Now you might say, wait a minute, Patrick's been with us 15 years? We thought he was sort of new. Well, a lot of these recognitions I failed to mention, we have people who've worked in other agencies. So it's really 15 years within the government agency system. And we're pleased that people like Patrick started with us and then went to another agency and came back he came back to the right place. With 20-year recognitions, we have Tim Davis, Kent Lundquist, Jamie Robinson, Kevin Woodruff, Rick Gaisford, Kent Lundquist, and Brian Ross. And again, we have some in the mix who have worked in other places as well. It's amazing to me when we get to the 25, 30, and we even had a 40-year celebration before. But for 25 years, we have had the pleasure of having William Daimler, you might know him as Buddy Daimler from CTE, and Barbara Faust, you might know her as Barbie Faust, working in audit. And Barbie's one who has worked in some other agencies as well. And I think you all know Murray Mazzaros, our great Murray, who's been with us for 30 years. And we just applaud all of these wonderful employees. So I wanted to be able to read their names publicly and acknowledge their wonderful work. And we had a great celebration yesterday. We didn't have a luncheon. We weren't able to all be together, but we were able to celebrate. Next. One of the other things I want to highlight, so much has happened in this past week since we met. We talked a little bit about graduations last week, and I think the week before. But it's fun now that we're to the end of graduations. We'll celebrate USDB this evening and maybe a couple of other places, but for the most part, graduations are over. And I love the commentary from students, from parents, from teachers, people who were really dreading these virtual or drive-by options. And there was a lot of lamentation before they occurred. But now we're hearing so many positive comments that they were more personalized. People felt more connected to their teachers and the community in the many ways that students were celebrated. There was so much creativity in the way that they were carried out with blended models and virtual and drive-throughs and drive-bys. And I think there are a couple that will even delay them until later this summer. I know I had the opportunity to speak at 2 different graduations. One was on a podium in a very rural town with a drive up, and another was was truly virtual at a virtual high school, and both were really fun events. So I just want to congratulate all of those behind the scenes in our schools, the principals, the counselors, the teachers, everybody who worked on these wonderful celebrations reimagined. I think the challenge now is there will be some expectations moving forward about a more personalized approach, because these were so special for our amazing class of 2020, and there are 3.8 million peers across the country. Next. I want to spend a minute just on COVID-19 updates. You will hear a little bit more as we talk about the way forward with a couple of action items, both on procurement and a guidance document. In the past week or so, I've been able to meet with some advisory groups that I've established. And these advisory groups are specific to a role. So I have an advisory group of teachers, one of superintendents, one of principals, charter directors, and then a broader advisory council that is made up of a variety of all of those education community members, but also extending into PTA, into childcare, after school care, just trying to think broadly about who is impacted by COVID-19 and how we can all work together to overcome some of the lessons learned. We'll talk about procurement in a bit, because we'll ask for a motion and using some of our 10% set aside. I've talked about thermometers early on and some of the personal protective equipment, but we've also had people approach us. You'll see announcements for various districts, for example, where a donation has been made of hand sanitizer, or a donation has been made of masks. And I know we have someone who has approached us and working on tests for adults in our systems, so that if a school wants to make sure all of their educators and their staff are tested before they enter school in the fall, that we would have that availability. So a lot of people starting to think more broadly about procurement. Technology is also in that space where we were able to jump on, Sarah Young and I were able to jump on a call and talking about some digital spaces with broadband and trying to shore that up. I also was on a webinar yesterday that I thought was really interesting. It was a man who from Germany who lives in Paris and has been working on looking at a lot of data from around the globe. And I can send you the slide deck because it was so interesting. But a couple of the things I wanted to highlight, some lessons that have been learned. The big thing is that issues of inequality have really been amplified through the closure of schools around the world. And this is not a Utah thing. It's not a national thing globally. We're really starting to look at the inequalities that were amplified. So the things that really popped out were students with disabilities and students learning English. When teachers, school administrators, parents, when they are surveyed, the number one thing that they express concern about are students in those categories, and very worried about the learning loss and trying to make up for lost time and how to meet with them and engage in safety protocols over the summer, et cetera. Digital access, we've talked about a lot. And in places like Denmark, for example, every student has a digital device, every student, and they have the same broadband in their homes, the same level, and they use the devices in their school. It's very integrated into their schools. So it's very seamless for them to transition in and out of school space. In countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, and even Japan, where they don't use digital tools in their schools hardly at all, there are great inconsistencies. And the United States kind of falls in the middle of, I think there were about 36 countries that were surveyed and examined, leaning towards more prevalence. And Utah certainly is on the end where we have more digital access and devices than most of our states and schools. And that's thanks to the good work of Rick Gaisford and others for many years who have laid that foundation. The home support, of course, we've talked about as well, and that varies all across the world in parents' ability to support remote learning. The other thing that surprised me is that teachers wanted more guidance on what and how much to teach. And I'm not surprised in general, but I'm surprised in places like Sweden, for example, where they have their schools are very independent. So each school determines their own standards and curriculum and what they teach and how much they teach. They all hunker down and kind of make those decisions. But even in Sweden, teachers felt overwhelmed and wanted more guidance on how much and what to teach. And we have sort of backed off of that and let that be local. In our state, we're hearing that same thing. Teachers are saying we were just sort of all over the place and trying to figure out the pacing and how much to send home and what the essentials are. So I know that that's what a lot of our LEAs are spending their money and time on in the summer, is trying to get clear about that. And then another thing that was discovered was really looking at assignments, and a lot of them lacked cognitive rigor. And there wasn't a lot of attention paid to essential skills like it's hard to collaborate on unless you know how to do so skillfully online and lead your kids online in a collaboration space. Creativity, perseverance, a lot of those things that we might teach in our schools, we put that into the home space. And in other states where they didn't have a digital teaching and learning initiative like we do, they are connecting with PBS and a lot of other online great tools, but just not a real coordinated effort about ensuring that there's rigor and meeting the standards. And then I didn't put this on here, but in accordance with the assignments, a lot of the countries that were surveyed, they are still moving forward with a lot of their high stakes assessments. Some of those put kids into career tracks in the secondary level and transition into college. So a lot of them are moving forward with some of the assessments where we're focusing more on formative to figure out where students are at, what they need, and how to help move them forward. Next. I want to focus for a minute then on one of these global lessons learned, and certainly it's we've really been focused on this in getting feedback from the advisory groups that I've spoken with. So what does that look like to carry out the board's mission in our strategic plan of creating equitable conditions? And how does that happen during COVID-19? What do we need to pay attention to? And we really tackled this in our Essential 5. And even though that was in phase 1 of our New Now, we still need to continue thinking about this as we move into the future. So we've worked hard to meet their basic needs. And we've done that by feeding kiddos, and Kathleen and her staff have been tremendous. We've reported on that. As we think about now fiscal policies and working with our legislature as we look at possible budget cuts, are we making sure that we don't treat every district and charter the same in terms of what they need, but are we looking at funding mechanisms that will help support our students with disabilities and our students learning English, and making sure that we think about equitable resources if we define equity as students getting the resources they need when they need it. We know that we need to improve remote learning. So while we did this great job of putting devices out, broadband still is an issue, and then making sure that our teachers are really prepared to shift from digital learning in a classroom to digital learning at home. I know that Board Member Lear and others have talked about this a lot, and thinking about how we ease high school into that college transition. It was a chore just to make sure our kiddos graduated, but they may be lacking that face-to-face with counselors and others in the school who are helping to ease them into college. And now if some of our campuses are closed, trying to make sure that we think about that more holistically, about making those transitions, as well as from elementary to middle school and junior high, and middle school and junior high on to high school. Those are really important, critical times. Another thing is just thinking about seat time. So you'll be talking about the 180, 990. And I think that's something the board really can lean into and think about. How do we extend learning time and make sure that our schools have the funding they need? Maybe not just with the CARES Act, which will run out quickly according to our LEAs over the summer, but how might we think about learning time during the school year as well? And then most importantly, how do we not just think about academics, but how are we meeting their social and emotional needs, which we've heard so much about with anxiety and other issues that have arisen during this time of remote learning. So I put those out there just for us all to think about when we look at the board strategic plan and our mission of creating equitable conditions. How is that amplified during this time of COVID-19? Next. So this, I want to end both on a somber note and one of hope. It's been a hard time to watch everything going on in our country, and Yet at the same time, it gives me hope that we can start having the hard conversations that we needed to have for a long time. As a white woman of privilege, I don't know what it's like to walk in the shoes of a Black young man or a Black woman, or even my employees of color at the Board of Education. I think we have to start having more courageous conversations and figuring out how we can do better by our students. Like you probably it took your breath away to see graffiti and worry about our building downtown and some of those things. And I did that. I have to admit, I was mortified by that. But I was so overwhelmed with sadness and grief in thinking about any of our students who feel marginalized, who feel unwanted, unloved, uncared for, who feel disenfranchised from our schools. And we can do better. We've got to do better. We should have a workforce that looks a lot like our student population, and yet we don't, and we need to ask why. So I just really believe as leaders, we have a responsibility to create mechanisms for systemic change. It's part of our board mission to move forward. And as we think about personalized education for each student, that needs to take into account the cultural and racial divide that some of our students might be experiencing in our schools. So I first had to examine my own bias and my own leadership weaknesses in not addressing some of these issues. Particularly, I wanted to start with our own office. So I wrote an email to our staff that was very heartfelt, committing to address some of these issues. And I had a lot of people willing to lean in and help me with that. So I'll be establishing a committee to develop and monitor a sustainable plan that creates a more inclusive workplace at USBE. So it's not enough just to talk about it. We have to do something actionable. And I had a couple of employees call for that action, that we create a sustainable plan. And I appreciate those employees who were so honest with me. We also have a leadership opportunity and responsibility to provide some guidance for statewide recruitment and retention efforts of educators of color. And as I speak with my peers across the country, this is a national issue. So we have to stop and ask ourselves, why aren't we recruiting and retaining persons of color into our workforce? I'm really interested in student voice. I had a wonderful experience at Granger High when I visited Granite District. They have a student body made up primarily of students of color. There was only one student who was not a student of color, but they were all so inclusive and they really represented their student body. And we had great conversations about the things at school that are making a difference for them. They were happy, engaged kiddos, and yet they were very clear about some of the issues in the school, but they've created structures within that school to support their students. And it starts at the top with their leadership and Principal Dunn in the way that they're supported at the district at Granger High and with their local board members. So I want to hold some town halls with our students of color because I was so buoyed up by the hope and the very detailed language that the students at Granger used when I met with them. I remember walking down the hall and a couple of them stopped and just stared into a classroom. And they pointed out that their favorite teacher was in that classroom. And when I asked them why, they used terminology like, she has high expectations of us. She expects me personally to do my best. She gives me the resources and tools that I need. She interacts with my parents. So those are the kinds of things we need to be hearing about how we can make sure that happens for every student in our system. So I'm going to be more intentional in the coming year, whether it's digital or face-to-face, holding some town halls and focus groups with our students and teachers of color. So I want to end with a graphic that Cheryl Ellsworth on our staff shared. Cheryl was featured on KSL Studio 5 during this week of unrest and attention to a very important issue on racial equality. And I hope I'll send you the links as a board. She did a segment on helping parents know how to talk to their kiddos, and then just one that was more general. And I love this graphic that is on Instagram, and I think it's Oh Happy Danny is the Instagram author. Until we fix things in our heart, and we address it in our homes, in our schools, in our community, then nothing will change in our community and the world. And I really believe that. So I just want to publicly state that I'm committed to trying to make a difference through my leadership and making sure that each student feels safe, cared about, and well educated, regardless of skin color, in our schools and in our communities. And I think that's a core mission and value of education. So I wanted the board to know that you'll see a greater commitment on my part to that, and I hope you'll join with me as well. And that's my report. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Let me turn this back on here. Questions, comments from board members? Board Member Thorpe.
Superintendent, I just wanted to thank you for your focus on equality and the conversations that you're having, the examination you're taking of the state board. And I also wanted to add, so thank you for that. And I would like to help with those conversations if that's appropriate. And then also I wanted to just say, add my gratitude to yours for the recognition of employees at the state board, many of them former colleagues, well, I guess current colleagues of mine now. So I'm so grateful for all of their dedication and their longevity working with the board. And so I just wanted to add my gratitude as well. Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members? I'm not seeing any. Superintendent, thank you.
Board Member Newell has a hand raised.
There it is. Yep, Board Member Newell.
Thank you, Superintendent Dixon. This is a critical topic that's impacting our entire society and impacts us from the day these young people get into school to the time that they graduate. And I'm a true believer that we have to have an awareness of the impact of the educational system in which these kids are participating in. And I just want to really thank you for bringing up this topic and creating some awareness. A lot of times we're not really educated ourselves as to how our influence creates the socioeconomic futures for young people. And it's critical that we continue to share this and that this conversation stays alive and active. And I too am interested in working with you and the state board for as long as I possibly can to interject where I can to bring some expertise and some understanding to the necessity for this awareness to be continued for years to come. So thank you again. And I hope to hear more about this and watch this grow as part of the DNA for the Utah State Board of Education.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other hands up. Are you seeing any, Vice Chair Cummins?
Board Member Cindy Davis.
You're a lot faster than I am scrolling through there. Board Member Davis. And I think Board Member Newell's hand's still up. Board Member Davis.
I guess I just want to say thank you for the discussion. Having watched the events over the past several days, I don't have the answers, but I kept thinking the angst, it doesn't start when you're 30, it starts when we're 3, and the building blocks and the steps and what's happening in the lives of our children all across the country. And I've just been thinking so much about it. And as I said, I don't have the answers, but I'm certainly in a place that I want to learn more and grow my paradigm and figure out ways to make things better for everybody. So thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other hands. So Superintendent, thank you for your report. I know we've got a lot more we're going to be hearing from you. And so again, thank you.